And I do want you to know that we're going to record this session. So if you are a little camera shy, keep your camera off. We are in the middle of our 5-event book talk series. So Diane is book talk number 3. We have 2 more still to go. If you are interested in showing up, we will meet again on March 24th to hear Susan Marie Franchak talk about the book Madame Curie, a biography, which was written by Marie Curie's daughter, Eve Curie. Very interesting perspective there. And then we'll finish up our book series April 28th with Elsa Wolf, talking about a Larry McMurtry book that's called The Colonel and Little Missy, Buffalo Bill, Annie Oakley, and the Beginnings of Superstardom in America. So that will finish up our book talk series. You can always find information on the Ashland Chautauqua website, which is ashlandchautauqua.org. You can sign up like you did for this event, or you may already be signed up for the other 2, and that is great. So tonight, the way we will do things is I'll turn things over to Diane in a minute and let her talk to you a little bit, just sort of an overview about the book. Maybe you did get to read it, maybe you didn't, and talk a little bit about Mary Surratt. But then we would love to have you put questions in the chat box, and then I will work with Diane to try to get to as many of the questions as we can in our time together tonight. So Diane Moran has been a part of the Ashland Chautauqua troupe 4 different times. She came for our gala event that we did and did Calamity Jane, but she's also done Rachel Carson for us, and Meek Geese, who was part of the group of people who helped hide Anne Frank and her family. And she also was Mary Chestnut, another Civil War character, Civil War era character in an earlier Chautauqua. So as I said, Diane lives in the Ozark Mountains in Missouri. She has been doing Chautauqua for over 35 years. She's a naturalist and also worked at the St. Louis Zoo for 25 years. So she brings this wonderful combination of a love of nature and a love of animals and a love of history and performance. And we are always really grateful when Diane can be a part of anything that we do with Ashland Chautauqua. So even though you can't see her, I'm going to turn things over and let Diane talk with you a little bit about Mary Surratt and the book she chose for tonight. So there you go, Diane.
Yes.
Are you ready?
I'm ready, yes.
Okay.
I'll begin then. Right. Okay. Well, it could be a mixed blessing that you can't see me. No doubt. Well, it's snowing here, and I've been doing a lot of work with the wood burning stoves. So most of the time I have a little bit of soot here and there, but I cleaned up for this. So all of that for naught. But what we're here tonight about is Civil War, Lincoln, Mary Surratt, and all of the other fascinating pathways that surround the subject. Mary Surratt was said to be a scapegoat, as were all of the conspirators who were executed. But in order to make up your mind about whether or not they should have been executed or even brought to justice is something you have to decide within yourself. I can tell you that for me, Mary Surratt was a person, when I first learned of her, that I felt needed to be vindicated. I was all ready to defend her and find out how we, the American people, had murdered her. Well, like Kate Clifford Larson, the woman who wrote the book we're talking about tonight, The Assassin's Accomplice, like her, she came into the same feeling I did. She wanted to see that Mary Surratt had not done anything wrong. But after she started uncovering all of the information, and most of it was not hearsay, but they were documented testimonies, which could have been lies, there's no doubt about that. But still, there was an overwhelming amount of evidence against her. How it all began, well, to know it, you have to take a look at who Mary Surratt really was. She was an older woman for her time, 41, 42 years old. And in that time, that was considered old. The newspapers, after she had been arrested, were really hard on her. They called her fair, fat, and farty. And she admitted to that. She said, yes, I suppose I am all of those things. But more importantly, what I want everyone to know is that I am a Southern woman. She was very proud of being a Southern woman. And then she went on to say that she was a Roman Catholic and devoted to her religion. And last but not least, she was a mother. I don't know if she meant those three things to be categorized in that way, with being a mother as being the final thing she was. But all three of those things were definitely pieces of Mary Surratt. So for myself, as a much older woman, well beyond the 42 years of Mary's life, I have to say that I am fair, but not 40, and fat. I can laugh about it. It's all right. But she could not. And if indeed you are 40, you don't want to admit to it. So from the mindset of this woman, suddenly comes this dashing. I'll even say it, he was beautiful. He was the prettiest thing most of the women had ever seen, and that was Mr. Booth. Mary had a husband before the arrival of Mr. Booth, and they lived in a little area that was named Surrattsville, and it had a post office in it, and it was at a crossroads. It was a tavern and an inn. Mary also had 3 children, and she did not like raising her children in that atmosphere. She wanted to get them out of there, and the best way she knew how was to send them off to school. And that's what happened with them. She would say that when her husband died, he was his own best patron at the bar, that is. And that was probably true. He died of alcoholism. That was in 1862. Surrattsville was very well known in the area as being a safe house for Confederates and spies. When her husband died, her younger son, Johnny, came home from school to take over the post office at Surrattsville. Her oldest child was already a Confederate soldier in Texas. And her middle child was her daughter, Anna. She had been at school, but now she would be at her mother's side constantly. Anna was said to be um, a sort of person that was timid and did not like to be a center of any attention at all. The decision was made by Mary after her husband passed to lease out Surrattsville, and she leased it to a former sheriff of Washington. It was a policeman by the name of Lloyd. As it turns out, this man, who was a big-time Confederate himself, would be one of the main people who sent her to the gallows. There were so many things that happened that we could take a look at, and for all of the things that occurred, the incidents, things that were said, there are 101 different versions. And that's because the subject of the assassination and everything Lincoln and Civil War has an unprecedented amount of writings to substantiate everything. I believe the last count I heard was over 15,000 different books on the subject. If there happens to be a scholar on all the subjects of Lincolnism, I'd like to meet them. Their brain must be exploding with all the information. Now, Mary decided that she would move her family to Washington. So she leased out Surrattsville and the post office to Lloyd. When she came to Washington and she lived in the house her husband had bought, it was a boarding house. There were close to 10 people who lived there, and one of her first boarders was a young man by the name of Weichman, Louis Weichman. Mary's son, John, would later, after the assassination, after Mary had been hanged, John Surratt Jr. would say of Weichman, he's a liar and nothing more. Even in school, he never hung with the rest of the boys. He was always tailing behind the teachers, telling them our own secrets. He was not well liked at all. More than that, he didn't even know how to shoot a gun. He didn't even know how to ride a horse. That is amazing for those times. But that was probably the main reason why, when Booth enters the whole story, that he did not want to confide in Weichman or have him a part of any of his plans. There were a number of conspirators along with Mary Surratt and her son John. Several of them were boyhood friends of her son Johnny, and he had gone to school with them, and they were later Confederate soldiers, but they were all finished with their soldiering when they came to stay with Mary. Now, they didn't live there. They came for a few days and nights at a time, but her door was always open to them, except one, the conspirator named George Atzerodt. She didn't like him one single bit. She said he was like her husband, an incurable drunk. When she found liquor bottles in his room, she told him to leave the house. Funny, isn't it? Well, it is to me anyway, that she didn't want anyone who drank, but people who were planning to kidnap and then assassinate President Lincoln. She gave them all the support she could. Louis Weichmann was one of Mary's favorite people. He was attentive to her just as he had been attentive to his teachers. John Jr. didn't mind that because he was gone a good deal of the time. He was a Confederate spy himself, traveling from Washington to Virginia to New York and to Canada. Washington itself was a hot spot for Confederate spies. And that just sounds so hard to understand when you think, oh, the head of our government, the federal government. And yet there were so many people who were against Lincoln, including Northerners, Yankees, soldiers. Now, there were so many reasons why they were against him that it would take all night just to talk about that part. But there were just as many people who loved him and honored him, just as you and I may honor and love him to this day. He was, as far as I can tell from the readings that I've done, a gentle person. He was a good person, but I can only imagine what it was to be president during times of a civil war. Horrible, so terrible. I can't even imagine it. Mary hated him with a passion, as did Booth, as did all of the other conspirators. And when we look at the reasons why for their hatred, part of it was they were Catholic, many of them. At that time, all over the country, there was a good deal of anti-Catholicism passing around. People feared what they didn't know and made up things, just as they do today. Very little difference. But back then, yes, that's the way things were. Catholic people were not trusted. And it just so happened that a good number of them lived in Washington at the time. The issue of slavery and the Civil War brought a lot of different elements to the story. When I hear people say that slavery wasn't the cause of the Civil War, I just kind of smile because I don't really know. I can only guess at what I'm thinking here. And what I'm thinking is this: slavery was a way of life for Southern people. It was the only way they had ever known. That doesn't make it right, but that's the way things were. And when Lincoln's thoughts of freeing the slaves came to many Catholic people, a good deal of them were Irish, Catholic Irish. They did not like the idea of freeing the slaves for the simple reason that they knew the freed slaves would take their jobs. Interesting how history repeats itself, because if we fast forward another 40 years ahead in time and we come to the great migrations of people coming to this country through Ellis Island and the other ports of entry, there was that same thought by the people who already lived in America. They feared the new immigrants. They thought they would take their jobs. And when that comes down to it, what it means is you don't have food to feed your children. That's not just taking a job. It means survival. So when we look at all sides of these issues, we can see that there were a number of different things that motivated people to do what they did. Mary is said to have kept the nest that hatched the egg, meaning that she kept the house that nurtured the conspirators that could hatch the plan for the assassination. It was hard to live that down. The newspapers, after she had been arrested, were brutal. They not only called her fair, fat, and 40, they said some of the most evil things about her, such personal things. They said she was ugly for sure, and that she had a tiny mouth and eyes that were like a devil's eyes. We read things like that today, and you almost have to laugh at that. Come on, that's so far out there. But the people believed these things. They believed what the media were telling them. There wasn't a whole lot of media coverage for anything when we look back on it. But when you compare Civil War and everything that occurred with the soldiers and the battles, it took quite a while for newspapers to get that information. Whereas in the past, no, it would have taken much longer. For instance, Revolutionary War, things moved much slower. But now, here we are in the 1860s, and Booth befriends Johnny Surratt. He sees that Johnny is an excellent horseman. He would fit well into Booth's plan of kidnapping Lincoln. Kidnapping? When I first read that, I thought, oh, come on. Kidnapping? Well, now, why in the world would he want to do such a thing? But when you learn why, it makes sense. His thoughts were, if he successfully kidnapped Lincoln, he could hold him in ransom in order to free all of the Confederate prisoners that were held in Yankee prisons, which would increase the war effort and make things a little more positive for the South. They tried, all these conspirators, there were 10 in all that we know of, to kidnap Lincoln, but it failed. It failed because Lincoln was known to change his plans at the last minute. On the negative side of that, we have Lincoln who refuses to have escorts, and Lincoln, the kind man who would tell his protector at Ford Theater to go watch the play himself instead of guarding him. So his kindness was his undoing, so to speak. And Booth was not one to give up. He was so well known. And as I have told you, he was a handsome guy. I have to say, even for today's standards, he was a pretty thing, no doubt. And to Mary, even though she was fair, fat, and 40, I have to believe that she had a crush on him too. Now, this is not substantiated in any way. All she ever admitted to was saying that he was her pet. That can mean a lot of things. All of the other women living in the boarding house, the women, they would fix themselves up when they knew he was on his way over. They would primp and comb their hair and spray their cologne, and the men in the house were very jealous of all of this, including Mary's son, John. We have to take a look at the things that Mary actually did on the day of the assassination. After the kidnapping had fallen through, there were other things to come, like the slaves being freed that enraged the Confederates in Maryland and Washington. There were other things too that would enrage them. They knew that Lincoln was planning many new things, and most of the things he planned, they did not agree with. Something had to be done about him. Lee had already surrendered. It was April 9th. And he gave his beautiful sword as part of his place in history as the vanquished. But guess what? Not all of the leaders, the Confederate leaders and the Yankee leaders, not all of them knew about Lee doing this. And so the battling, the killing continued on and on past the date of the surrender of Lee. So technically, I guess you could say the war was still alive. What that meant was when Mary Surratt was arrested after the assassination, well, she was tried in a military court because it was said the war technically wasn't over. And so she had done something against the government and needed to be tried in a military court. She had lawyers. You can imagine how hard it must have been to get a lawyer for her. The loved and hated President Lincoln assassinated, and anyone who would dare to defend any of those conspirators must be a conspirator as well. That's how the people thought. But as things turned out, it was not always that way. So for Mary, at any rate, she was considered a ringleader, if you can believe that. A ringleader. It wasn't Booth, it was Mary who made all the plans. But it wasn't. It was Booth, but she had to be in on it. Other people talked about how when Booth would visit the boarding house, when Johnny wasn't there, they would go into Mary's bedroom and close the door. Woohoo! It was said they talked 3 hours at a time, maybe. I don't know. We'll never know. We can only guess. And that happened on numerous occasions. When her boarder, Weichman, was called to testify, he spoke about that. So did some of the other boarders in the house, talking about how Booth would come and everybody was in a tizzy at his arrival. Things happened, and Mary was caught up in it, just as the other conspirators were. As she had made plain before, she was a Southern woman. She was proud of the Confederacy and her part as a Confederate woman. She wanted to do whatever she could to help the cause, and she did do a lot. She asked Whiteman to take her back to Surrattsville. She said that she wanted to collect a payment due from one of the men that owed her husband money before he had passed away. Well, she never met that man when they reached Surrattsville, but Whiteman said that she gave Lloyd a package. Later, it was found the package held, the lenses that would help Booth to see at great distances. On another time, she was telling Lloyd that he had to do a number of things because soon there would be parties coming who would have need of the shooting irons that some of the other conspirators had brought earlier. She told Lloyd also to have 2 bottles of whiskey ready. This was all done the day of the assassination. Booth would visit her 3 different times on that day. Now, to say that she didn't know about the assassination, it's a pretty far stretch, I think. But there really wasn't anything definite to tie her in with the plans that Booth had. His idea now was to completely wipe away the government. So by killing Lincoln and the Vice President Johnson and Seward, that would enable the South to gain a better footing and to make its way back again. Well, didn't happen that way, as we know. John Wilkes Booth made his plan. He made his plan apart from the Confederate government plan. Jefferson Davis may have heard of Booth, no doubt he did. But was he in on the exact plans to assassinate the president? It's doubtful. So we're left with Booth taking this on himself and the conspirators he gathered about him. When he shot the president, he had to do a bit of battle with a soldier who was there watching the play with the president. He stabbed him a number of times. Meanwhile, at the same time, Seward, no, he didn't die. Lewis Payne got away, as did Booth. Booth had help. Lewis Payne did not. There would be so many people who would be brought to trial. It's interesting that not all of them, not nearly all of them who were involved in the assassination were brought to trial at all. It was said that the government, the Northern government, actually paid some of the jail people at the time to testify against Mary. And we have their testimony after the hanging that was so. While Booth actually did the killing, it was the only high official that was killed. The other conspirators were not able to do what they were expected to do. George Surratt refused to kill Johnson. He absolutely refused, went out and got drunk, went to a bawdy house, had himself a good time, and then went and stayed with his cousin. That's where he was found when he was arrested. The others would be arrested as well. On the night of the assassination, the police came to the Surratt boarding house, and Mary and everyone, they were all being, under the thumb of the police. They were suspected Confederates, and it was well known that they were, on a tip that they had received, the police. They were looking for Johnny because they knew he was a Confederate spy. What happened from there, him being a spy, but being nowhere around at the time of the assassination, led people to wonder what was going on. It would be several more days. They would come back again. It would now be April 17th. Booth was on the run with Davy Harold with him. All the others would be captured. And now it was left up to Mary and Dr. Mudd, Surratt, Arnold, and all of the others who took part in the conspiracy to have to defend themselves. The men prisoners were made to wear cloth hoods over their head. They were shackled all the time. Mary was not. So, being a woman, she was given some leeway, not a whole lot. She was, after all, in jail, in a prison cell that measured 6 by 3. She had a slop bucket, and there were no curtains to hide any of her natural functions. They came, guards outside her door at all times. Even so, they were very respectful of her. She said that. She went on a hunger strike. They were afraid she was going to die before they could kill her. But that didn't happen. It was one of the senators of Maryland, Reverend D. Johnson, a famous man, really, who decided he would defend Mary on the basis of the trial being unconstitutional. It should have been a civilian trial, so he said, and not a military. But he received so much flack that he had to step away from an active role in defending her, and 2 young lawyers fresh out of school were named as her defenders, Mr. Aiken and Mr. Clampett. They had never, ever defended anyone before. Her trial was their first time in a courtroom. They didn't know what to do. They couldn't help her. Besides, they had a hard time believing that she was innocent. What about Johnny through all of this? People were talking about how Mary Surratt was going to be executed. Didn't he know? Why didn't he come home? People were wondering. I'm sure Mary was wondering as well. He was being protected in Europe by the Catholic priest. Now, it wasn't just because they were fond of him. They were protecting him because they wanted to protect themselves. That's what it came down to. They did not want to be involved with the Lincoln assassination, and they thought by hiding Johnny, they could help the situation. They went so far as to keep him from reading any newspapers. They said, "It will do you no good. We know your mother will be released." The federal government has never executed a white woman before, but that would change. Everything was done at the time that could possibly be done to save her. They even tried for a way of clemency, a writ of habeas corpus, and President Johnson refused it. He said she's going to have to pay, and pay she did. We can only imagine what it was like for her the night before the execution was to take place. Her daughter was with her. Her daughter, of course, would be touched by this the rest of her life. So would Mary's two sons, Johnny and Isaac, her older son. And so we come to the day of the assassination, and Mary is escorted by Catholic priests who believed she was innocent and who may have possibly known where her son Johnny was, but they wouldn't tell. And she went to her death. It's strange the way people's minds work when they are in a mass as opposed to individuals. And we all know this, we're adults, we know how that works. There seems to be this false bravado among us when we're in a mass, but individually we can afford to be a little more lenient. But when she was hanged, the American people were angry. Oh, before she was assassinated, they were all for it. Let her receive the same that Lincoln got. Kill her as well. But no one actually believed it would be done. And when it was, there was a great uproar about it. And you know, it's never stopped. Still to this day, there is a large number of people who insist that she was innocent. There are countless books talking about her innocence and proving as best can be that she was innocent. The same with Dr. Mudd. His family, up until very recently, petitioned the government to say that their relative, Dr. Mudd, had nothing really to do with the assassination or any conspiracy at all. But he was the doctor who treated Booth's injured leg after the assassination. All of these things are still being debated to this day. So it's up for you to decide. The book, The Assassin's Accomplice, gives you the thinking and all of the research that was done by Kate Clifford Larson. And it is a large amount of work that was done. You have to pay attention to it. You may interpret it in a different way. Well, I want to know if any of you think that Mary's son, Johnny, should have been executed as well. So I step back and I'm ready. Let me have it.
Thank you, Diane. I think maybe only you could be so spellbinding without video. So I appreciate that beautiful storytelling that you just gave us. It does seem that Johnny is a popular topic because that's what's showing up in the chat. Are questions about him. First, like just how old was he? And somebody said he must have been around 21, according to, they Googled it. So was that true? He was around 21?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, he was.
A couple of people thought he was in Canada when the trial was going on, but he was in Europe, you said?
Yes, he was in Canada first. He then went to Europe with the help of a priest. He even served as a papal guard for the Pope during that time. And it was over a year and a half after the assassination when he was finally apprehended on his way to another foreign land to escape imprisonment. But still, we come back to that question of why didn't he do anything? What was with him anyway? Was he that spoiled? She called him Johnny, my Johnny. Boy, he needed a swift kick if anybody ever did. It was Johnny Surratt. He would say later, after his own trial took place in 1867, and he was interviewed in 1869, 1870, and he would say, and he began to cry when he gave this testimony, that he did not know that his mother was in such a bad state. He truly believed what the priests were telling him, that everything would be all right. The people would just get over their anger and she would be released. Our government never executed a white woman. Oh, plenty of Black women, yes, but never a white woman. And they even kept, as I've said, the newspapers from him. This is what he said. He didn't know how bad it was. So,
Well, I'm curious if people either would like to unmute or put in the chat the answer to Diane's question. What do you think? Should he have been tried and assassinated as well? Does anyone want to speak to that or stick something in the chat about that?
I definitely think he should have been tried. I mean, maybe not for the assassination, but definitely for the attempting to kidnap him. Because like he was pretty big in that plot, so I don't know why they wouldn't have at least charged him for conspiracy to kidnap the president, because they had a lot of evidence there.
Thank you, Katie. And Diane, Katie put in the chat that you said you'd like to meet a Lincoln historian. She's a history major with a focus on Lincoln and his presidency. And she said it's a ton of information. So Katie's right there with you on this interest in the Lincoln story. Anyone else want to comment on John's role in all of this, or shall we move to different things? We did have somebody comment that ask if anyone has seen the movie The Conspirators. And Diane, have you seen that? And if so, what did you think of how it represented the major characters? Have you seen that one?
are you talking about the video? The sound was breaking up.
Yeah, the movie,
DVD oh, okay.
Yes, The Conspirators.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I did see that many times. And every time I see it, of course, I find something that I missed before. But it is, after all, Hollywood, and not everything was factual. a good deal of it is, and I loved the film. I truly did. I wonder how much the people had to do with it who were portraying, for instance, Robin Penn, who was doing Mary. I don't know, but I did greatly enjoy it, but did find some things that were not true.
And while we're talking about that movie, Diane did send us a list of books and I think a couple of films. I don't remember if that was one of them, but I will add it if it wasn't, because when we send a follow-up email tomorrow, we will include that list if you want to keep reading or do some video watching about this story. Let me ask a question, Diane, about the Catholicism piece. Dorothy Stratton asked, much was made of Mary's piety as a Roman Catholic. Can you tell us more about how Southern parish priests and the Catholic Church dealt with the issue of slavery during the Civil War? And was it different from the way Protestant clergy in the South spoke of slavery to their congregations? Did you get that?
Sure.
Good.
If I'm hearing you correctly, and it's still garbled, you want me to answer Dorothy Stratton's question about the Catholic stand on slavery?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. There were a good many Catholic Irish people at the time, particularly, who did not want slavery to end. And it was, as I have said before, strictly economical. They didn't want to lose their jobs to the slaves who they knew were going to work for less money. As far as actually being for the issue of slavery, they had this mindset that it was mentioned in the Bible, and the way it was mentioned was that it was one of man's faults. But that was it. Not that it should be stopped, but just that it, well, yeah, it's one of the things that mankind has done. It's not right. So that is all I got from that. But there are books on that subject. They're coming out the wall every day. I believe there is a book on the subject of Civil War or Lincoln. Yes.
I'm going to turn my camera off in hopes
an interesting side.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
I have an interesting sideline to this. I did Mary Surratt in a community that was heavily Catholic down in St. Genevieve, Missouri. And I didn't know it while I was performing it, but there were several priests that were present, and they had made a lifelong study of Mary Surratt and the accusation that the Catholics had planned the conspiracy and the whole thing. They came to me afterwards and we talked a bit about it, but they were so knowledgeable about everything. I found I was asking them the questions. So there is a feeling, even to this day, of people trying to defend various others who were accused at the time of having a part in the killing of Lincoln.
We have a new question, a new topic area. So let me see, I lost it. Hang on. So in the book, the night detectives returned to the boarding house to question Mary. And Payne, who attacked Sewell, showed up with a pickaxe. Later, he said it was just to change clothes. Why would he bring a pickaxe? Was that clear enough, Diane?
I'm sorry. I didn't hear all of that.
Okay, so Payne returned with a pickaxe. Why would he bring a pickaxe when he returned to the boarding house?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Okay. Yes. All right. After he had tried to kill Seward, the conspirator, Lewis Payne, who had many aliases besides Payne, he hid out, and he hid out in a graveyard. And he knew that there were police all about searching for not only him, but all of the others as well. So he hid out in a churchyard for 3 nights, and he was covered in mud and dirt, and he wanted a place to stay. And he wanted, I suppose, to be with someone who could tell him where Booth was, and that someone was Mary. As fate would have it, on the very night that Mary was being questioned in her home by the police, there comes a knock at the door. They answer it, and here he is standing, all covered in mud with a pickaxe. And when the police asked him to step inside and they began interrogating him, they asked him why he had come to the boarding house. And he said, I have been hired by Mrs. Surratt to dig a gutter, a drain gutter, on the side of her house. And I just wanted to come the night before to see if she still planned to have me do that. The police turned to Mary. They're all standing in the same room. And they asked Mary, Mrs. Surratt, do you know this man? And she raised her hand and said, upon my honor, I have never seen this man before. Oh boy, Mary, Mary, she was telling a big lie. Of course she had seen him. He stayed at her boarding house. Everyone in the house had seen him. So that was found to be a lie. So interestingly enough, that one thing, her failure to identify him, at knowing him, would be one of the things that would condemn her. The other things were Weichmann's testimony that he lived in the house and he saw them all talking in whispers, and he knew that Johnny, who was his school friend, was a Confederate spy. He knew all of that. And then there is also the testimony of the drunkard who had leased Surrattsville, John Lloyd. His testimony that Mary had ordered him to get the whiskey and the shooting irons ready. So Lewis Payne, the man with the pickaxe, he knew what was going to happen. He and Booth were probably the most, I suppose, passionate about the desire to kill the president and do whatever they could to save the Confederacy. As it turns out, of course, they would both eventually die. So, any other questions?
Yeah, let me try and see if you can get this. So have you drawn a conclusion as to Mary's guilt or innocence? And if you believe she's guilty, what is it like to portray a character whose story is contrary to your understanding? So that's Dorothy's fourth question on her list.
Yeah, that's my favorite one. I love that question because it gives me a chance to explain myself. Not that I have to, of course, but I want to. When I first learned about Mary, as I said in the beginning, I wanted to prove her innocent, not to anyone else, but to myself. I just couldn't believe that she had done what she was accused of. But after reading a number of books, I have to come to the conclusion, along with the author, Mrs. Larson, that she knew. And one of the main things for me was her closeness with Booth. He had to be unloading on her, talking with her 3 hours at a time. Really? You're not just talking about the fireworks that were being shot off. So, yeah, I think she was guilty. I definitely do. And the question about how could I portray someone that was such a supposedly bad person. I love doing her. I truly do. Even though I believe she was guilty, I give her a voice. I still give her a voice. And if you can tell by the presentation that I will give of her, that she was a woman who believed deeply in what she was doing, then I've done my job. I've done what I wanted to do. It's no bad thing to me to be able to pass on the essence of the person I'm portraying. I enjoy it so. And the more questionable their character, I think the better I like it. It gives me a chance to perhaps be a bit more outspoken than I really am. But when I take on the persona of somebody else, let them take the rubbing for it. But I'm enjoying it too. I hope that answered it.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's a wonderful segue to talk about our theme for the year. So, you know, we're doing the famous and the infamous, and we had Lizzie Borden and Malcolm X, and now we have Mary Surratt. And we were drawn to these characters who are intriguing to us in so many ways, even though they can be interpreted in this both positive and negative way. And so, yeah, we all look forward to seeing you give voice to Mary and letting that come out of you. Somebody in the chat says, I think she was guilty. Passions were so high during the Civil War. Otherwise, there would have been no war, which is well spoken. So I know this hasn't been ideal because we didn't get to see Diane's beautiful face, but I love the fact that we got to hear this story, at least vocally. And I appreciate all of you sticking with us with the technology difficulties, and adding your questions into the chat as well. We'll be sending out a survey tomorrow. It'll also pop up tonight when you leave, I think. And it's also there in the chat if you'd like. If you would please fill out the survey, it's really important for us to gather data. grants and things that we are doing to know how we can improve. And along with that email tomorrow, you will have some books that Diane has recommended and a couple of films. And if The Conspirators isn't on it, I will be sure and add that to it so that you can keep enjoying the stories of Mary Surratt. Please, if you can, join us for the next 2 book talks. And if you can come to Ashland, Ohio in July, the 12th through the 16th, Diane will be there live. She will do workshops and she will present Mary Surratt on, let's see, it'll be Thursday night at the band shell. And so we would love to have as many of you who can come show up and hear it from Mary's voice directly instead of channeled through Diane. So thank you for coming. I think we had a couple of comments. Let's see, Diane, I think Katie gave us the comment that I wanted to make sure you got. Oh, she said that she thinks Mary might have wanted to be out of the loop, but with Booth being charming, maybe he convinced her. I think that's kind of what I got from Diane earlier too. I think you both are onto something there. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for coming. Please join us on March 24th for Susan Marie Franchek and the story about Marie Curie. And we hope you have a good evening. Stay safe if you're in an icy area or high winds or flooding. Thanks, everyone, and good night. Thank you, Diane.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Diane. This is wonderful.
Yeah, it really was. All right. Well, if I end the meeting, I think you will get a survey, so I may try that. And thank you for coming. Let's see.